Welcome to The Disruption Is Now. Join us on this enlightening journey as we explore how AI is impacting our jobs, careers, lives, and the human experience. Each episode, host Greg Matusky will converse with visionaries and innovators at the forefront of AI, diving into its challenges, opportunities, and impact. So buckle up as we venture into the heart of disruption, and together, let's unfold the future.
Well, welcome to another episode of The Disruption Is Now. I am your host, Greg Matusky, our podcast where we talk about all things about human communications and AI. I'm also the CEO of Gregory FCA, which now, after our recent acquisition of Back Bay Communications in Boston, we're 120 professionals strong with offices in Philadelphia, New York, Boston, and London. So I'm excited about today because I'm joined by somebody who has been studying AI for most of his professional career. He is the CTO of Dr. Lisa AI, which is a firm that really is embedded in trying to help enterprises gain the value of artificial intelligence. Eric Fraser, did I get that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Thank you very much,
So
Greg.
tell
It's
me
a
a
pleasure
little
to be
bit.
here.
Tell me a little bit about your background and how you seem to emerge at a moment in time that's perfect for your background, skill set, and education with regard to AI. How'd this all come about?
Yeah, it came about basically through good luck. So when I graduated from university, as we call it in Australia, the software revolution was really just taking off. Software obviously existed already, but it was really coming into its own as a massive force in the economy when I was graduating. So I kind of fell into some good timing. I'm a software developer by trade. I have been studying areas of computer science and software that were not previously called AI, but are now falling under the umbrella of what people tend to label as AI. So, for example, I noticed now that linear programming optimization, which is a pretty old branch of math and has been, expressed in software for decades, that's now apparently called AI. So I guess going by that definition, yeah, I've been studying AI and programming it for a long, long time. Certainly way before ChatGPT was invented.
So you and Dr. Lisa Palmer, you've have this consulting company. Really, what is your aim of the consulting company? Who are you working with at what level within the organization? Because what I'm really interested in is how do you implement these programs? It's become such a behavioral change issue more than an AI issue at this point, at least on my spectrum. Am I right?
Yeah,
Am I wrong about that?
That is really well put. It is actually about behavioral and cultural change in an organization. But to answer the first question, which is what's our purpose? Why are we here? We're here to help companies and organizations, not just companies, but some government entities as well, some nonprofits, make practical use of AI and to apply it in their operations so that they can create value for their customers and their employees. And
so where do we stand on that continuum with regard to enterprises or NGOs or the government? I mean, is it being accepted? Is it seeping into the organization? I remember back in the era of social media, the bring your own device to work craze, where everyone was concerned about outside devices being used for internal email and informational storage or exchange. Where do corporations, enterprises stand? Are they accepting of it? Are they intrigued? Are they implementing and deploying and seeing value?
It's 50% intrigue and 50% caution or fear. And I think this is actually fairly rational. Now, obviously, I'd like to see a lot less fear and a lot more adoption. The adoption is slow because the AI industry, if I can call it that, has not done a fantastic job explaining itself to society and business. The way that the AI industry has chosen to explain itself makes it sound a little mystical. and a little arcane. Like it's something that you will only ever understand if you are, let in through the gates of the fortress. And, the fortress is made of black obsidian, and, you shall not pass unless you're given a special, badge to enter the fortress. And that ethos, or that vibe that the industry sometimes gives off, is not a vibe that creates confidence.
I think that's a very interesting point, right? Because when, for instance, ChatGPT was announced or introduced, it gave you a single line, right? The GUI interface, the first time I saw it, it said, these guys are crazy. I mean, there's just a line where you can type something in. That's not engaging. That's not interesting to me. But it really was a general purpose platform. The whole thing was done with this mystique in that it was never explained because there was no purpose, right? This wasn't a CRM or a Salesforce or any other ultimate use software products. This was something left to the user's own design in a way I had never seen before. And as I shared with you before this call, that was joyous to me when I saw what it could do for the first few times. And it's interesting, your second point, in that there's this expectation that you have to go through the archways of heaven to be able to experience it, but it's quite the opposite. I always tell my people inside Gregory FCA, play with it. It's a safe area. It's locked down. Right? We've gone through the protocols to get the right versions that are locked down.
Yeah.
So experiment. I mean, start with stupid stuff. Make, like we all did in the beginning, haikus or speeches in the voice of Donald Trump, and grow from there.
Right.
It's safe. You can do this. And so what would have been a better way? What's a better way of explaining it? I guess that's my question for you, Eric.
Yeah. Well, it depends on the company. I like the way that you've chosen to introduce it to your people, which is basically to say, play with it. So some of the approaches that we take with our clients are, basically a version of play with it. Now, the play that we encourage is structured within a context of, let's see if we can brainstorm some business ideas, but you guys come up with the ideas, not us, because we're not in your business. So if they're in, automotive manufacturing or something like that, we don't know about automotive manufacturing, but start thinking about problems that you wish you could solve, but the current systems and processes just can't seem to solve them. And we encourage something that is in that border zone between analytical business thinking and play, because the act of playing the way that you've chosen to introduce it to your people can actually create and prompt some really clever, very useful ideas for the business, even though it's not a creative business. That's so true. I mean, just this, you're right on mark, Eric. And it's kind of like, that's a bit of a second level skill set, because when you initially do it, if you're not prompting right, or you don't understand that it's a start point in that process, it'll give you very genericized responses. For instance, ask it to build a marketing campaign for Dr. Lisa AI, right? It'll give you, you should have a blog. You should have a podcast. But within that, there might be one or two ideas. This just happened to me this morning. I have a client that really wants to do a reputation repair campaign, but they don't want to talk about what has caused the need to have a reputational repair campaigm. That's it.
And I riffed on it I say riffed because I always, instead of natural language processing, which sounds technical, I tell my people, just talk to it like you would a person, but give it the level of detail and be repetitive, and don't worry about transitions, and you don't need a lead. Right. But I explained the whole situation of what to do, and when they had a disruption to their network, the real value of the service was made apparent, and that is, it had connected people in such a way that it enabled these experiences all across the world. So when it went down, it was no longer a tech provider, right?
Yeah.
The users didn't care about the tech. What they cared about is running my business from the Alps, or they cared about communicating with my grandmother from Persia to Grand Rapids, Michigan, right?
Yeah.
And it made connections once it was explained like that were just profound and allowed us to drill in more. What kind of things have you seen? Is there any anonymized solutions that you've worked with clients that have come up with this kind of answers that you can think of?
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to address is the question that you asked, what could the AI industry do differently? That, I was referring to the fact that sometimes the way they describe what they do it sounds a little bit mystical. And one policy that we follow at Dr. Lisa AI is before we say something, we ask, is this going to mystify it even more, or is it going to demystify it? Because what we're going for is demystification. So one angle to demystify is simply to illustrate to people what the end effect is. And so you don't have to worry about all the math running, in the vector spaces and the tokenization, all that stuff. But this is just what you can do with it. You can draft a half-decent press release if you give it enough basic information about what you're trying to say in the press release, and then it will write a draft for you. And that's a way of demystifying. So Play can demystify AI. So that's what I like about the approach you've taken to it. In terms of, what we've seen, we've seen a pretty wide variety of uses, but the use cases that we tend to get called in on the most are where there is a sort of a trenchant problem that people have not been able to solve. The general idea that there's this new tech out there that they may not fully understand, but it is powerful and it's new. So the question gets asked, can this new thing solve this old problem? And the answer isn't always yes, by the way. So sometimes we're getting pulled into situations where someone says, can you show me how ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity solves this problem? And sometimes the answer is it doesn't solve that problem very well. You're better off using some other tool, some older thing to solve it, or human intelligence to solve it.
I agree with you. Sometimes, the things you think, I guess this is the term from the Wharton professor, Ethan Mollick, the jagged edge. There's things that it does very well, like writing press releases. Why? Because they're very formulistic, and they're in the training data everywhere, right? Of course, there's a lot of bad press releases in the training data too. And in fact, in March of 2023, we released something called writerelease.com, which was it was just a templated skin for OpenAI, but it walked you through 70 different kinds of press releases, which we had done this work in advance of chat because we were thinking, how could we automate the content generation process? And so we released Write Release, and it was very templated. So to walk you through, it'd say, what kind of press release do you want to write? Who is the audience? How does this coexist with the vision of the company? How does this advance the vision of the company? And for young people, junior associates, that templated approach was very successful. But what we found is that once they gain skills, now it's more the rift, right? That they don't need the training wheels to direct them. They know how to speak to the machine on their own, which is kind of like all the early AI apps that were whacked by that everyone thought they had it figured out, and they were raising money to launch companies, and lo and behold, OpenAI or ChatGPT or Claude did it once you realized how to do it. But one of the things that this whole experience has taught me is that junior associates in my firm seem to gain the most from this. Once they're trained well on this, they can they just improve their performance so greatly. Senior associates gain time, right? They can do it more quickly. Not always as well, right? But the junior associates can come up closer to the senior associates. So it really is a game of leveraging time and putting resources into those that are most important that the AI does well, right?
Yeah.
Like a couple things AI does not do well. It doesn't do media pitches, as we call them in our business. It doesn't do that well. And it doesn't do it well because there's nothing in the training material that would encroach upon the First Amendment rights of a reporter's email. You just, or the communications between a PR person and a reporter could never be, it's very hard for the legal system to get access to those, right?
Right.
So that's one thing it doesn't do well. But what it does do well, and this is the workarounds we're finding, is it'll identify trending topics in the media and then help you find those stories that haven't yet been reported about it.
Yeah,
okay?
That's good at that.
So that gives you a vector to go in, but it doesn't write the pitch well. It's often too wordy. It uses all the cliches, where you see the word delve 100 times or, all the ones that are reported. We have a whole list here internal to Gregory FC. These are the words that if you see in ChatGPT, edit out because it's a tell that it's AI generated.
Yeah.
But what about the downside of all this? I say it's a game of leveraging time, right?
Yeah.
There's only so many hours that the global workforce has. And if machines take a lot of that percentage away, what does that leave us with, do you think?
Yeah. So there's, I think that story that you told illuminates some of the downside. So one of them is, you mentioned a pattern that we see in a lot of professions, which is if you use AI to help people, it'll take the beginning people, the people who are just starting within a profession, and it'll bring them up to average performance more quickly than if they were not using AI. So you can take a beginner and move them to average performance more quickly. Once you are above average in your profession, right now, today's AI, it's not that easy to replace those above average people. I think a Goldman Sachs person very early on, just after ChatGPT was released, they were asked, what do you think this type of AI is going to replace? And he said, mediocrity. That's what it'll replace. And I think that's the harsh Goldman Sachs way of saying it'll replace, below average people. It won't replace above average people. And I think that's holding true. If you're above average in your profession, you're not going to be replaced by AI, but there are probably some things you do that are simple enough that if you supervise the AI, it can save you time. Just like a senior associate in a law firm might delegate something to a junior associate and say, just read, these 300 cases and figure out what the trend of the arguments was in the defense. Now, an AI can do that pretty quickly because it can read documents, instantly, and people read at human speed. But one of the dangers that creates is an illusion that the AI is as reliable as a proficient human professional, and in a lot of cases, it isn't. And you only find that out when the mistake surfaces in a horrible way. Like, a lawyer submits some documents in court and the judge finds out these cases aren't even real. You've cited cases that don't exist in the real world. That actually happened. So that's one of the dangers, one of the drawbacks is over-reliance on AI because of the illusion of competence. At a certain level.
It is so affirmative. It is so affirmative. And because it's perfect in its syntax and its grammar sometimes, your expectation is that it has to be accurate.
Right.
Because it makes sense. Right?
Yeah, that's the illusion. It's a compelling illusion. Right. Yeah. And the other thing is, if you're a junior person in your profession, you may not see the illusion. If you're a senior person, it's much more likely that you'll see the illusion. Like it'll write something about the field that and you think, wait a minute, that's not true, right? And so as a senior person, you catch it. As a junior person, you may not catch that. So
yeah, for sure.
You need to have senior human experts reviewing this output for the time being. And so one of the dangers is if you don't do that because you think, well, I want to save money, I want to just have AI do it all. You may have a mistake flow all the way through to your customer, and then the customer has to bear the cost of the mistake, which is obviously, that's the worst possible case. The other really obvious one, of course, is that some people will be displaced from their jobs. And we haven't, as a society, done a lot of great thinking about what we do for those people. I think that it would be pretty bad if our response was, oh, well, too bad. I guess you'll just have to adapt. Why don't you go learn Python programming? I mean, not everyone wants to be a Python programmer or an AI engineer. Some people really like their jobs, even though some of us might look at that job and say, oh, yuck, I don't want that job. I don't want to be a warehouse supervisor.
Insurance claim adjuster.
Sure, yeah. But what if you love being an insurance claim adjuster or a warehouse supervisor? That's fine, What do you do for those people when they get displaced by robotics and AI? I think it's kind of inhuman to just throw them on the scrap heap and tell them to adapt.
Let me shift gears for a moment here and ask you a question that's more broader. And what is your definition of AGI, do you think? And I saw Lisa's one talk, she was talking about tasks, right? Which we're not quite there yet with autonomous agents. And so, the traditional definitions are kind of changing now that we've met some of those benchmarks. So what is your definition? Would AGI look like?
I use an older definition that I learned back in 2016. So a year before the transformer architecture, which is the mathematical architecture of all of our large language models. A year before it came out, I went to a conference where some AI scientists of that time were debating about whether we should even build an AGI. And so the first thing they had to do was, well, let's just agree, what are we talking about? When we say AGI, what do we mean? And their definition was something that was aware of itself as an entity, that it was separate from us as an entity, that it could develop its own understanding of itself and the world without us training it. So it would have to, just very physically, it would have to have some sensory, apparatus in the same way that we have eyes and ears, and, it would have to have some kind of sensory apparatus to gather information about the world, form an understanding of what is the world and what am I and what are these humans without any programming from us at all, and then to have the freedom to make its own decisions. So that was a very high bar for AGI. I mean, the bar for AGI now is much lower. I've heard, Sam Altman say things like, it's an AGI that can string together tasks in a logical way. In at least the same level as a human worker might. And, under that definition, I've seen some Excel macros that you could call AGI. So
for sure,
I prefer the higher bar because I think it's more meaningful. But I understand that there is economic utility in making things that jump over the lower bar. Like if you can make agents that, can search the web for, show me the last 100 press releases that were written about, oil spills, and then tell me, go and search social media and show me the response to those press releases, which ones fell flat and which ones seemed to get the company out of trouble. That's pretty handy, right? I mean, rather than having some poor junior associate
I got to tell you, Eric, we're pretty close to doing that right now here inside my firm. I mean, we did a project recently that was very similar to that. We identified, it was all one set of crisis, one crisis. We identified every company that suffered from that issue in the last year. Then we identified all their responses, and we threw that against a couple things, negative press sentiment and also stock price, right?
Yeah.
And it did the first two of that. It identified all the companies that had an issue, and it gave all the responses, and then it gave a very generalized review of the responses, right? Mm-hmm. Against what we fed in to be best practices. Okay, we said here are best practices.
Yeah.
How do these align, right? But it didn't then, it didn't then make the jump and combine that with negative press coverage or stock prices. But
sure,
those are the kinds of things internally at Gregory SCA. That's where the workflow initiatives come in. Like, how do we take very tedious, because that would be a very tedious process.
Oh, yeah.
You'd search them all. Mm-hmm. You'd find the results. You'd do a scan of all stock prices. You'd do a scan of all negative. What it would be good, though, what it is good at is if you've done all that work and you enter it in, right? Then it'll give you the analysis, and you say, don't go to your training data for this. Just take it from the data that I'm providing in knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Then you get a pretty good look at what the world's about. It's pretty impressive, as far as what it can do in that regard.
I think that's really useful. If it did that one step further that you're talking about that it didn't quite do, maybe that would jump over the bar of AGI that's being set now. And there's nothing wrong with having a system that does that. I bet none of your people were looking at what the AI was doing, thinking, I wish I got to spend my nights and weekends doing that. That looks so fun. Probably everyone was pretty happy that an AI did it instead. And they got to do higher order human thinking about, okay, well, what do we do now?
Right.
So I think it's
do you think that's a reality? Do you think AGI is even in the scope of reality? And if so, how far off do you think it is?
Yeah, I think the
Your
lower
bar.
Yeah, the high bar of reality, I do not see a mathematical or computer science pathway to achieving that in the next 10 years. I think the first thing we'd have to do is discover better math. So I just don't see it. But
say that again, Eric. Discover what?
Better mathematics. Because right now, the leading mathematics that we use for the popular AI that everyone thinks of when we say AI is perceptrons and transformers. And those two, perceptrons is like the base layer and transformers is a layer on top of that. Those two things together, I don't believe will bring us to something that jumps over that very high bar of AI, something that can learn about the world without us training it, can develop a sense of self, can be self-aware, can have its own motivations, and can take its own actions. I don't think that perceptrons and transformers get us there, and that's math. The lower bar of AGI, which might be able to take that third step in the workflow that you were talking about. So not only am I aware of, okay, this is the last 100 press releases that were written about this type of problem, and then this is how social media reacted. Okay, and now here's the effect on, the stock price, and here's what you should do next. Here's what you should say next through which channels. That type of AI could be possible in the next 2 to 3 years. Now, I personally don't like calling that AGI, but I understand why people want to label it AGI because it's really good for marketing. So if that's what you call AGI, then yeah, I can see that happening in the next 2 to 3 years.
Now, again, I'm shifting gears on you for a second to get your opinion on something. Do you see any threats that could limit the ultimate use of AI, right? You've been through this, the ebbs and flows of AI. I mean, I had an engineer on who, a technician who had started this his study started in 1960 with AI, and he had seen hype cycle after hype cycle, nothing like today. Now he's convinced that he's at Carnegie Mellon, and he's convinced that now it's mainstream. Like ChatGPT really did us a favor by introducing it to the mainstream, right?
Yeah.
But I read all kinds of horror stories that we're never going to have enough compute, that we're going to run out of human content, and it'll just be Xeroxing Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox, and the quality will go down. Do you see anything that could set us back?
Yeah, I do. And so I would classify them as two things. There's threats And then there's just sensible or, natural limitations. So on the threat category, I would say there are things like bad actors, Russian troll farms, that sort of thing, who would seek to take the technology and use it in a manipulative and negative way. And that can destroy the public's trust in AI, and it can make people pull back from using it. So it can essentially just create a fear of AI. And it's not just Russian disinformation. I mean, it's, for example, people who run scams to try and steal money from other people, right? You can use AI tools to do that much more effectively and much more quickly. And if that's how people perceive AI, then there might be a really strong pullback from, letting AI get enabled more widely. On the sensible limitation side, you've got things like, power grids are not currently designed to generate and handle the amount of power that would need to be pulled through that grid if we built all the data centers that Sam Altman seems to think we should build. If the growth of use in AI really is going to be as steep as the most optimistic people say it is, then we actually will run out of power generation capacity. We probably will run out of some of the raw materials that go into the chip supply chain. So there are some, rare earth minerals that will become prohibitively expensive because we'll be digging too many of them out of the ground, or, the stores of them will get harder and harder to get to, just like oil and gas. So there are going to be some of those limitations. The solution to this is to try to find more energy efficient ways of performing the same calculations. So that is a mathematics and computer science problem, and people are trying to solve that problem right now. So we'll probably make progress in those areas. There's an engineering effort that we should make to try and reduce the power draw, essentially the energy requirements of the computers and the chips. And that, again, is a computer science and hardware engineering problem. And then there's also the question of, are we using AI for what it's really designed to do? I mean, if you needed to dig a shallow, 2x2 foot hole in your backyard, would you go and hire a professional backhoe, for $2,000, or would you just grab a shovel out of your shed and just dig the hole? So what we should not do is let the AI industry convince us that, go ahead and hire that $2,000 a day backhoe. And they're economically motivated to make you do it. But we should put on our critical thinking hat and say, wait a minute, I don't need that. I've just got a shovel in the shed. I'll just dig the hole with the shovel.
Right. I mean, it's in my business, it's kind of like using AI to write a LinkedIn post, right? By the time you're done,
right.
I could have done it. I could have done it a lot quicker. But for a junior member, right? Maybe not. Maybe it does help them create, come up with ideas for it and what have you. You never know. I mean, it's going to require innovation on so many levels. Or it kind of reminds me about the space race. Someone asked me recently, I think one of my children, they said, why didn't we ever go back to the moon? And I explained it was a lack of innovation because it took such an effort to get there, and it was so costly that we never innovated how to do it more efficiently. And I think a lot of people, they kind of dismiss the efficiency innovation, not just the big breakthrough, right? Not just ChatGPT, but how do you get more out of a chip? How do you think differently about the energy it uses to do certain, what Apple's doing, for instance, and keeping some of these things local and then sending some to the cloud, right?
Yep.
That's innovation in efficiency. And I think with the grid and with energy, and even with content, for training models, we're going to have to rethink all this in vastly different ways. How can we make sure that the quality of the machine-generated output stays strong? Again, that's something, I mean, everyone will remember ChatGPT, but you're not going to remember how NVIDIA just, wrung a little bit more out of every chip in the world which
Sure.
reduces the energy, or how the computations allow for more efficient use of these chips. I'm totally in a realm outside my expertise.
No, this is
I hope
absolutely
I'm saying
true.
that right.
Yeah, there is. I mean, there's a Microsoft team that came up with a fundamentally different way of representing numbers, essentially, on the chip, which is much more efficient. And that, if that became a standard, I mean, that would significantly reduce the amount of energy that data centers need to use. So there's innovations like that people are trying to make real and make scalable. So we are trying to solve them, but for now they do remain limitations.
I'm gonna end with one last question. What has surprised you most about this whole, I won't say revolution, I'll say transformation? How's that?
I think what has surprised me most in my own experience is that working in the field and having to study the technology every day, that actually makes me think much more deeply about what it means to be a person, what it means to be human, what it means to be alive. So I did not expect, going into this role and taking this job, I did not expect to be considering questions of philosophy as often as I do. But I actually have to do it for my job.
I could not be more aligned with you. When people ask me that question, I say, what surprised me most is how it's changed me. It's opened my mind.
Yeah.
I've listened to things I never would have considered. Is there a neural network in plants? That would have been a ridiculous question 5 years ago. Today, you think, well, maybe it moves so slow, that neural network, that we don't even know how to begin to understand what it's doing, right? What it means to be human, consciousness, awareness.
Yeah.
When did that spark come to us? Will machines take it away from us? Or will we maintain our status and our position in that? Eric, it's been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your time. And how can listeners get a hold of you?
You can go to our website, which is simply drlisa.ai. So doctor is just DR, and then Lisa, LISA.ai. And you can get a hold of any of our teams through that website.
Well, again, thanks for being with us. I know Lisa was going to be with us, but she's recuperating from a cold.
She is. She sends her apology.
We send her our best, and maybe we'll catch up with her sometime too.
Yeah, I know she would love to do that, and I really appreciate the invitation to be here. It's been a real pleasure to be your guest.
Thank you.
This podcast is a production of Gregory FCA. If you enjoyed our discussion today and want to continue exploring the transformative power of AI, please check out more episodes and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.